Yo,
Greetings.
what up? What's
Welcome,
poppin'?
welcome back to Underqualified, everybody. Hope that you're all doing well. Before we get into today's topics, repeat the rules for everybody who has not participated so far. Rule number 1, even though it is called Underqualified, we will do everything in our power to only say things that are true to the best of our understanding. Number 2, if you know better than we do about whatever it is that we're talking about, and we get something wrong or you have something to contribute to the topic, you are required by underqualified
By
law
law.
to tell us either what we did wrong or things that you know about the topic. And number 3, most importantly,
Don't be a booty head.
be nice to us because we're doing our best. And welcome to the love episode.
Yeah. When this video airs, it will be around Valentine's Day.
As close as we can get it.
Yeah, we are nowhere close to that as we're sitting here recording it, but we had these ideas and thought, hey, we can do a Valentine's Day special. So yeah, we're excited to. What are you talking about today?
I'm going to be talking about love in nature, and I'm putting the love in quotes because there isn't love in nature. But...
Good. And then after Nicholas talks about that, I'm going to break down the 5 love languages, which are very popular, get talked about a lot. And so, yeah, we'll jump right into it.
Yeah. So the first thing that I want to say, I'm going to be talking about some of the mating strategies and pair bonding things that happen in various areas of the animal kingdom, but perhaps the most important and critical thing to understand, and this was mentioned to me several times in various biology classes, is there are not morals in nature. And that is a pitfall that people who like to think and then talk about what they're thinking about have fallen into with nature for centuries, as we as humans have tried to draw moral conclusions in any particular direction, be it for monogamy or non-monogamy or any sort of other number of things from nature. And that's ridiculous, and you shouldn't do it. There's everything from infanticide to total non-monogamy. Anywhere in nature, there's all sorts of different things that would be considered abhorrent in the human world, and it's because it's nature, things evolve that way. But anyway.
What about those nice posts where, the snake, takes care of a tiger cub that fell in a well or something like that? How does your science explain that, mister?
That is kind of what I was going to talk about, because I said in the opening that there is no love in nature. And in all honesty, we don't really know if that's true, because animal psychology is extremely difficult, and you can't just ask a bird if they love their partner. But there are definitely various species that mate for life, and there's evidence of creatures such as crows or elephants seeming to host funerals for dead members of their groups. Is it actually a funeral? Is there profound sadness there? No idea. We may never know. We can guess that there's some sort of higher processing happening there, but we have no true way to sort that out because we can't ask them. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about what pair bonding and mating looks like in various areas of the animal kingdom. And the important thing in all contexts of this discussion is what's called fitness. And you hear that a lot in biology classes, and what they mean by fitness is not like what's your mile time, but it's it's more along the lines of how good are you as an individual or as a species at passing along your genetic code into the next generation of progeny. Because at the end of the day, in nature, that is basically all that matters. You need to live long enough to reproduce as many times as possible. And you see several different ways that have been evolved to make that happen. The first, there's a K type and an R type, I think. It's been a minute since I took this class. But there's 2 classes of creating offspring within the sexually reproducing branch of the animal kingdom. And one is that you create an absolute butt ton of offspring that you don't really care for. you don't
That's
really.
good, man. It's R selection and K selection.
I got an A in that class, and I do remember things.
R being unstable environment density independent, K being stable environment density dependent interactions.
There we go.
Yeah,
So what that means in simpler terms is if you think of like trees do not raise their offspring at all. They send out a bunch of pollen, it sort of mingles in the air, and it might fertilize, and it might grow into a tree, and it might not. And the polar opposite of that would be humans. Humans have relatively very few offspring. Of course, humans get messy because we've sort of taken ourselves out of the evolutionary picture. Let's say elephants. Elephants have very few offspring, and they spend a really long time looking after them. That is a common trait in a lot of quote-unquote higher mammals, in that we spend more time looking after our offspring and raising them because they are in an internalized amniotic egg, and so they're born fairly undeveloped, as opposed to things like some birds, which are born out of a external egg, and so they can sort of develop in that egg for a long period of time. But the thing that we see probably the most across the board is what's called female mate choice. And that can take a lot of different forms, but basically what it is that it is down to the female of whatever species you're talking about to choose from a selection of males for which one or ones she is going to reproduce with. And the reason that you don't see a ton of monogamy is from a fitness standpoint, monogamy is bad because it does not encourage genetic recombination. So if the only person that you if the only individual that you as another individual mix your genetics with, it's only that one combination over and over and over again, the genetic diversity of your species suffers from that.
Right.
Because if you mate with several individuals of your species, you're getting substantially more combinations. And so even within monogamy, we see things that we still call monogamy, but they aren't really monogamy. And this is sort of where what I said about morals comes in, because there's something called serial monogamy, which means that usually it's birds. Most things that practice monogamy are birds. But there are these monogamous pairs where the female will actually like scoot off to somebody else's brood and mate with the male and then come back.
No. That's so sad.
See, you can't do that. Don't do what he's doing.
But the dad bird would be sad.
It's an evolutionary trait that has evolved to help increase the genetic diversity of the population. That happens a lot with seabirds that form like colonies. So you're not you are mixing, but it's kind of self-contained in a smaller community. And so in order to continue to diversify the population, they all sort of spin around. There are some cases where social monogamy actually happens, which is that the female selects the male and they pair bond for as long as one of them is alive. There's other instances where it's a seasonal thing, where it's monogamous during the breeding period, which is a thing that really doesn't happen in humans because our time scale is so strange. You know, we've taken to the point where we're raising our offspring for 18 to, you know, however many years.
Right.
And so your breeding period, most birds would not still have the offspring from the first breeding period as they go forward. You know, those birds would develop rather quickly and would leave the nest, and then you can come back and do the whole thing over again in the next breeding season.
And some species, like you said, actually have a couple of months. That's their breeding season.
Yes,
that's
it's the only time that it happens.
And human beings can pop them out in any time of year. So,
and so monogamy is actually pretty rare in the animal kingdom, and like I said, it primarily happens in birds. There's several branches off of this, and I am going to talk a lot about birds because I took an ornithology class and we spent like a whole month on the different ways that birds reproduce. And so another one is you're going to have to keep up with all of the polys. It's polygyny, which means one male with multiple females. And that can happen in several different formats. That's found in very few species. It happens in a couple birds and insects, but it's mostly in mammals. And so usually how that presents itself is something called resource defense polygyny, which sounds really strange, but it just means that a dominant male will sort of stake out his area of wherever the habitat of these creatures are, and then the females will come to use those resources and be protected by the male. So deer, elk, that's why they have horns that they slam into each other, is to compete for females and stake their territory and things of that nature. A lot of those manifest as harems, where there's a male who has kind of herded several females and they just sort of go around together. I think bison do that a lot. One of my personal favorites, and one of the strangest, which I was showing you before we started recording, is called a lek. And that's L-E-K, lek. And this is primarily birds again. And it's where a group of males, in a community sort of clear off this area and they all present in some fashion. You see a lot of birds with really crazy dances and crazy feathers. My personal favorite, and I was shown this by my ornithology professor, is the sage grouse lek. And this can actually, I think this actually happens in Colorado. It's out on the plains, so it's not something that you would see, in the Denver metro area. But the sage grouse is a really weird bird. And I highly encourage whoever is watching this to look up a video of a sage grouse lek. You're not going to see anything creepy that you don't want to see, but they have these huge air bags, essentially, on their chest underneath their feathers, that when they are attempting to mate, they'll set up this lek, and all the males will inflate these bags, and they'll do this sort of like chest press thing, and they'll slap them together, and it makes this like it's this weird, you'd think it's out of like a sci-fi movie or something, and that's how they attract mates. Whoever has the best blowing is the one who gets the female. It's just really strange. There's all sorts of examples of small jungle living birds doing leks. There's one where like 4 male birds will all sort of do this like conga thing where they jump over the top of each other. It's really funny.
There's a bird mating documentary with Sir David Attenborough that I remember very vividly watching in my junior year of high school biology course, and there are just some that are crazy. I remember, I'll try and find what species of bird this is. They construct this really complicated nest.
Bowerbirds.
Yes, bowerbirds. Yeah, yep. And they do interior design to attract their mate, and that's like.
So almost that entire documentary is female selection, which is why all the males can dance. They have all these crazy colors. They do all these weird things. It is the same process that has evolved all of these different ways of occurring. Those are all just different ways to do the same thing. To keep moving down the list, we've got polyandry, which is one female with multiple males. So kind of a harem, but in reverse. And again, same idea, just a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Visualization of increasing the reproductive success of the female by combining multiple different males. Resource defense polyandry happens, I think, in one species, and it's called the spotted sandpiper, which is a bird. The birds do all of the weird mating things. And I would love to know if there's other examples of this, but the spotted sandpiper females control and defend territory, which the males then come to. And that's the only example of that I've ever heard of. There's something called cooperative polyandry, which is which has occurred in the Galapagos hawk. In this case, I'm taking all of this from a nature.com article, by the way. I'm not just spitting all of this out off the top of my head. Give some credit where credit is due. In this case, all the males in the group copulate with the female, and they all participate in brood provisioning, so building the area, bringing in food, defending the young, all of that stuff. One of the things that is more common is what biologists call promiscuity, which sounds very scandalous, but it just means that there's no pair bond. You know, you're in a group and you mate. There's some amount of choosing in some instances. In some cases, it seems to happen randomly. And in places where the environment is really unstable and the genetics are really unstable, that can be really good because you need to get as many recombinations of genetics as you possibly can in order for the species to continue to diversify and survive in the long term. There's one that happens in fish, which hopefully I don't get flagged for saying this. It's called sperm competition. And so it sort of it reduces the fitness of the male down to the fitness of the reproductive material, because there's no actual copulation, which happens, of course, it happens in fish because there's a body of water that you can suspend the genetic material in without having to actually do the copulation. And so there's really strange instances of fish creating, these areas that have the genetic material in them that the females can just come up and take some to fertilize their eggs and then go hide the eggs elsewhere. And so that creates a whole different type of evolution. Is it creating more of the genetic material? Is it giving it the opportunity to expand more so the females are more likely to find it? It's a whole different branch of evolution because it almost doesn't come down to the living male at all. He just has to produce it in a way that the female can find it, and he's done. And again, that would be, in all likelihood, an R-type selected situation where the female would defend that clutch of eggs for a very limited amount of time, right, and then leave it. But sort of the overarching, point that I'm trying to make is that the way that humans have chosen to reproduce is extremely unique. And there's some discussion on whether or not it is actually the way that we were designed to reproduce, or if it has been sort of incorporated into our culture and understanding of the way that we're supposed to reproduce by religion.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because
before we jump super deep into that, I want to harken back to, and that's not the right word use of the word harken, but refer back to what we're talking about mating seasons.
Yes.
And how human beings don't have one. And the statistics say we kind of do.
Oh, really?
A little bit. And so I have this cool graphic that if we had a higher budget, we would project right here. And so it's got all of the countries, most of the countries in the world, and they're organized from the highest latitude to lowest latitude, so the northernmost countries to southernmost countries. And I'll show it to you, but you just imagine, I'll describe it as well. So,
put it in post.
Yeah, exactly. And then it has the months of the year where there are the most live births per day.
Okay.
And you'll see that in the northern hemisphere, the most births occur in the summer months, June, July, August, and September for this in Greenland at the top. Mm-hmm. And then as you move further south,
it kind of drifts.
It drifts later in the year until when you're getting further and further south, the highest number of births are actually happening earlier in the year. And so the simplest explanation would be when it's cold outside, people make babies, and when it's warm out, they have them. But the science of that is a little bit more complicated. So there are, let's see. There's another good graphic here that's sort of the same sort of thing. And you can see it's a pretty strong correlation.
And actually, this is giving me a good idea, which is that if I remember to do this, we can put these resources in the description of this video for you guys if you're curious to see what we're referencing, because again, I'm not pulling this out verbatim. I'm using a source here that's the nature.com library, and then Benjamin pulled up this. Where is this from?
Towardsdatascience.com.
There you go. So if you guys are curious, we could include those links in the description and give you a chance to actually look at the resources that we're using.
So it's the article calls it a quasi-mating season because it's not really true that it is not really a true one, as women are receptive to sex year-round and ovulate every 28 days, not annually. So it's not actually like a mating season. It's more of a
time that it happens.
Yeah, a response to climate and like environmental factors.
And
so yeah,
humans are strange in the world of reproduction in several ways, because the females are fertile once they reach fertility age continuously. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, and there's portions of their monthly cycle where they are less fertile than they would be at other periods of time. But that ability to reproduce at any point during, ages whatever to whatever is kind of uncommon in nature. Usually, in particular in mammals, it's like, there is a mating season where you are fertile for like 40 days, and if you don't find a mate, you have to come back next year. Which manifests also in a way that a lot of people probably don't think about, which is that humans are the only mammals that have permanently developed mammary glands.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Is the only example of that in nature, as far as I'm aware of. For all other mammals, that only happens as the female is getting ready to deliver and is then raising the young before they go off on their own. And again, I don't have an article pulled up talking about this, but it would seem to me that there is no particular forced reason for humans to be monogamous. We've chosen it because, again, we've sort of removed ourselves from certain portions of the normal natural world. But there is, and I don't want to be culturally insensitive, so I'm going to call it a village in China where they still practice polyandry. The people who are from that village do. So the one woman has multiple male partners. And that, there's examples of religions where polygyny of a male having multiple wives has occurred throughout history. But again, humans kind of meddle with that, right? So what's the reasoning for that? In some cases, it's because the religion is so segregated from the rest of the population that they truly just need to have more children in order to keep the religion alive. There's other cases where it's basically a cult, and somebody came up with that idea because they wanted to have multiple wives, which is creepy. And that's where the morals come in. And so I'm trying to keep it as biologic and non-moral as I possibly can. Because it is just a part of being a living individual, is the innate evolved desire to procreate. It's wired into our biology because if it wasn't, we would have died out. And it's really interesting. There's all of these different ways that nature has evolved. It's kind of strange to say that nature has created, but nature has created for this same process to happen. And humans are such a fascinating and frustrating biological example because we're far too smart for our own good. And so we have meddled with all of those processes and come up with all of these norms and standards and societal expectations and ways that we like things and ways that we don't like things, least of which being the way that we are in love. And that happens differently for different people and ties into what you're talking about with the love languages.
Yeah, definitely. That was a really good segue. And I'm again going to divert it because I still want to talk about what you're talking about, but we'll jump right back in. I just think that talking about is monogamy natural? It's sort of, it's hard to argue that it is because it's sort of a recent development looking at the timeline of humanity as a whole. That's marrying for love is very Western, and marrying for life is a fairly recent concept,
right?
And so it's hard to say, human beings were meant to be monogamous because that took thousands of years to sort of develop,
and we only have a couple thousand years worth of
data,
of written information about how it was happening, and even that is spotty in places.
Right. But arguing that monogamy isn't necessarily natural doesn't mean to say that monogamy is wrong.
Right.
There are a lot of things that humans set themselves apart by not doing what is natural,
yes,
or sort of talked about in that way. And so we're not necessarily saying that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it from a morality standpoint, as you were trying to maintain. It's just like, was this, from a biological perspective, does it make sense?
Right. And I should include, because I didn't mention the good part about monogamy, because there are non-human species that have chose monogamy as the way to raise their offspring. And I just sort of talked about the bad bit, which is that the genetic recombination decreases substantially from promiscuity. But the good bit is that you will often create well-prepared, strong offspring that can survive without you once the monogamy period ends. So once you have finished raising that set of offspring, there's less of them and they're stronger, because the monogamy is almost always a K-type selected species. And so that is the advantage. And so all of these species over time have weighed out the benefit versus the detriment. So you lose that genetic recombination ability, but your offspring are usually entering the world more fighting fit than something that just combines genes, buries it in the sand, and leaves.
Sure.
So that is the benefit of monogamy.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So let's talk about the 5 love languages. And so these actually, I didn't realize how long this had been around. This guy named Dr. Gary Chapman wrote a best-selling book about called The 5 Love Languages in 1995.
Oh, wow.
And so I only started hearing about these a couple of years ago, because it's definitely internet thing.
Yes.
There are hundreds of quizzes out there to determine what your love languages are.
Yeah.
I have taken several of them. And that's all more...
I'll take one live while you're talking.
Perfect. Yeah, what we would talk about is popular science as opposed to actually research-based science, because, taking a BuzzFeed quiz on, not to call out BuzzFeed or anything like that, but it's not...
It's junk.
Yeah, it's...
I'll call them out. It's junk.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really based on any particular science, but this is very, very common pop culture
absolutely
type idea. And the basic concept behind it, I think, is a pretty valid one, which is that there are ways that we can communicate love and affection to others, and ways that we receive that information as well. So you have a love language that you can speak and present to others, and also a love language that you can read when it's being delivered to you, that makes you recognize that you are being shown affection to,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the 5 love languages, yes, 5. It's called 5 love languages, so it makes sense that there are 5. Are words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, gifts, and physical touch.
Okay.
And so basically, just to do a quick rundown of those, words of affirmation would be compliments, verbal encouragement, words of appreciation, telling someone verbally that you love them, and or in the modern world, saying nice things about somebody on social media.
Sure. Without being prompted in a lot of...
Without being prompted.
Again, that's the thing with... I've always heard this about acts of service, is the important thing about acts of service is you don't have to ask for it to happen. The other person just does it.
Yeah, exactly. And quality time is the person wants to feel affection by their partner wanting to be with them and spend time with them and always being down to hang out. And so the important things with that would be active listening, eye contact, being present in the time with another person. Acts of service, as you talked about, it's some examples would be, bringing your partner soup when they're not feeling well, or making their morning coffee, or et cetera, and the idea that actions speak louder than words, so you're showing loving actions towards another person through acts of service. Gifts, pretty straightforward. You give them stuff. Physical touch.
Which I think that kind of gets a bad rap.
It does. That is not one of my love languages. I shouldn't skip over it like that because it is important to some people. But
because to me, I think when you say give someone stuff, we get sort of the commercialized interpretation of like, oh, my girlfriend bought me a Jeep and that's dope, But in a lot of times it's like, I went shopping and I saw this thing that reminded me of this thing that we did that was really meaningful to both of us, and so I got it for you without prompting. And that can be really powerful. It's like, I thought so strongly of you when I saw this thing that I just had to get it for you. I think that is... I mean, there's some people that just want stuff, and if you just want stuff, that's okay. But I think for a lot of people, when we talk about gift giving, that's more along the lines of what it talks about.
And this article takes a more positive view of it as well. It says it's not really about the monetary value; it's the symbolism behind the giving of the item. So somebody had to think about what to get you, come up with an idea that they liked, and be deliberate in the choosing of the gift, and then go about actually getting it for you and presenting it to you. So that's just a whole process of showing someone that you care, and that is perfectly valid. And I shouldn't dump on it the way I just did. I took the quiz that I took. It just gave you a breakdown on the number of questions that fell into each category.
Yeah.
I had 0 for gift giving.
It's not for mention.
So that's just not me. I don't. Yeah. I mean, you can give me stuff, but I really just want to hang out and cuddle. So, which moves into physical touch, which is also self-explanatory. So, showing physical signs of affection, holding hands, cuddling, etc., making time. For physical intimacy, and so there are just sort of the idea that love languages get used in romantic relationships. I'm gonna sneeze.
Hey, salud.
We'll edit that out. So your partner, you need to have an understanding of how your partner shows affection and how your partner wants to receive affection.
Which are not always the
same. So your partner might show affection really well through acts of service, but really struggle with words of affirmation. So I feel like that's the most common example, is people who don't necessarily effusively say that they love you, but will, do all sorts of things, very caring things that show that same idea. But that can be really difficult in a relationship if you're someone who needs words of affirmation, who wants to be told that you're good and cared about, and if your partner really struggles with doing that. And so I think, as I talked about before, this is very much a pop culture phenomenon, and less so a very scientific, super methodically well-researched type of conclusion. And so I am hesitant to promote the super strongly that these are the 5 love languages and everybody experiences love in these ways, and as long as you're thinking about these things, your relationship will be successful. Because basically what happened was Dr. Gary Chapman wrote this book, and he is a psychologist, and this is his sort of perspective from working with couples, and talking to them and helping them through relationship problems over the years, and so it's sort of drawn from experience rather than data. But because it's taken such a hold in popular culture, there has been some research done on its effectiveness, like after the book was written and after a bunch of people
actually implementing
swore
it.
by it. Yeah, and so some studies have concluded that it is going by the 5 love languages as they're described in the book is better than other ways of resolving differences for couples. And other studies sort of basically what they conclude is that what is essential is being able to recognize and adapt to your partner's needs.
That's what I was going to say, is that I feel like the most important overarching thing is actually talking about it.
Yes, as a general concept, as opposed to these are the 5 specific areas in which you navigate. And so what the 5 love language approach relies on, because if you're using that for couples counseling, you would identify each other's love languages and then work to accommodate your partner's specific needs, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that part of the problem can be that you turn it into sort of an either-or situation, and I'm saying that because this quiz that I'm currently taking is making me pick between one thing or another, and there's been a couple situations where I've been like, well, I don't really need either of those things to happen.
Sure, yeah.
Or I would like to have both of those things happen.
Right, yeah, and that's why a lot of those quizzes in particular are not super psychologically valid. They're just sort of fun to take and learn, and if your results resonate with you, then you say, yeah, that's me.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But also you can change.
Right, sure, yeah.
Some days you need different things than you do on other days.
Absolutely. And well, the point that I was going to make was what is sort of a necessary first step for using this approach to help marriages and long-term couples is a willingness from both partners to adapt and to accommodate your partner's needs that are different from yours. And so knowing your partner's love languages is not going to be beneficial to your relationship if you're not willing to adapt your routines and your actions. Right? And so really from a psychological perspective, it's more about adaptability and the care for another person to want to express affirmation to them in a way that they will appreciate and that will make them feel good. And so I think that's sort of the valid takeaway from this research and this book that Dr. Chapman has written, is being accommodating to your partner. And I also think that this typically gets talked about in romantic relationships, which makes sense because, you know, love languages, we think about romantic love. Right. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing whatsoever, but I think that you can apply that concept of knowing how to respond to other people's needs and what makes them feel appreciated, and you can apply that to any context of relationship. Yeah. And so you can use that in your professional relationships. You can say, okay, this person needs this kind of communication in order to feel heard and appreciated in our business work context, I guess. And so that sort of attitude is a little bit of a paradigm shift from what our default is for most of us as people, which is how do I feel good, what makes me feel good. Right. Well, and which is a evolutionary trait. Yeah, exactly.
Look out for numero uno.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so that sort of idea of looking at any number of relationships as just different kinds of communication that resonate with people in different ways, I think is really powerful and pretty universally applicable. So a lot of disagreements and difficulties in working relationships could be solved by saying, what is the obstacle to our effective communication, and how can I, shift and adapt to that in order to connect with this person in a different way.
I was just kind of chuckling at your statement that you kind of glazed over, that communication and listening to what other people have to say can solve all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hardly a revolutionary stance to take, but I'm just sort of wary of trying to fit people into a box, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
And say, okay, this person responds well to words of affirmation, so I'm going to give them words of affirmation. Because, it's all of these are functional as a method of showing affection to someone when it's genuine. But I think if it were to come from a place of, I know that my partner, or I know that my coworker, or I know that my friend likes to have nice things said about them, and so I'm going to say, hey, I really like your hair and your glasses and your shirt and your shoes. I think you're really great.
Yeah, do you mean it, or are you just pushing the appropriate buttons?
Right. And so sincerity is also a factor. I just think that there are a lot more sort of fundamentals that have to be in place before you would want to institute just the 5 love languages as a means of counseling. And so I just wanted to put that out there. But
well, and for some people, like me, your love languages are a mess. Because we'll divert a little bit because I've completed my quiz, and I will tell you all that my primary love language is apparently quality time. But that is at a strong 30%. And acts of service, receiving gifts, and physical touch are all at 17%, and words of affirmation is at 20%. So because I had to choose either or for this quiz, I have barely a 10% separation from my top one versus my second one. And clearly, if you're nice to someone, they're probably going to appreciate it, because there's times when I would like all of these things.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so that sort of reinforces 2 points that I'll make here in the last couple minutes of my time.
Yeah.
Which are that everybody probably appreciates some aspect of each of the 5 categories at different times or another, and they're all characteristics of healthy relationships, right? Maybe with the exception, if we're talking about, a coworker, of physical touch and receiving gifts. If you
that can make people uncomfortable if they're not close personal friends with you or something of that nature.
If we're just applying this to a romantic relationship, then I think these are all characteristics of a healthy romantic relationship. So words of affirmation might not be the most important to you with your partner, but you still might like to hear occasionally, now and then, verbally, that they care about you and you're a good person and you do a good job. And maybe you don't love it's not a necessity that you receive gifts, but it still might hurt your feelings if your partner doesn't get you anything for your birthday.
There's some societal standards creeping in there.
And so, even, for me, if I got a 0 on receiving gifts, but if there's a societal function like a birthday or Christmas thing, then that's just sort of something you do. And
because then if you aren't doing that, then you are bucking the societal expectations. You're like, well, what? So what happened that I'm not worthy of whatever the circumstances are.
Right, exactly. And I think also, there was a second point I was going to make.
I'm sorry.
As a result of
our backdrop.
Stay.
My hand will just be down here, and none of you will know that I'm secretly holding up our backdrop for the rest of the show.
Okay. Perfect. But there are, I guess, contexts in which meeting somebody's needs in a particular category will be more impactful than others. Right. And so this article that I have pulled up from the University of Arizona, which did some after post-publishing research on the concepts of the 5 love languages, they were talking about specifically with physical touch, that they talk about elderly nursing home residents feeling unwanted and unloved because of that lack of contact with others. And so it's a very, it is based in research to say that having physical touch and physical affection from other people is very beneficial to mental health.
It's needed just on a human level.
Yeah, just on a human level. It doesn't have to be romantic. In fact, I think that non-romantic physical touch, especially for men, is like pretty paramount.
Hard to come by
and
in a lot of people's lives.
Right. And so societal convention can occasionally sort of push us away from things that meet our needs the best. And also just some more interesting points about physical touch from U of A. People are significantly more likely to return a dime left in a phone booth if the preceding telephone caller touched them. That was a designed experiment, I guess.
So specific.
Yeah, they set this up. Let's see where that's from. Researchers Gallus and Spence from 2010 conducted a study in which they set that up. So they left a dime in a phone booth and then had the person who was using it beforehand come out and go, "Hey, how's it going?" And then keep walking or not. And they found that was statistically significant. So that's really interesting. The design of the experiment is sort of that's weird. But okay, cool. People, this is sort of outdated as well, but people are more likely to give someone a free cigarette if the request comes from a person who touched them at the same time. So I would imagine you could transfer that to
all sorts of other things.
All things that don't kill you.
Well, something that doesn't have a ton of value, but you also don't have.
Right, you have cookies. Right. And somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh my gosh, so good to see you. Could I have a cookie?" And you say, "Yeah, sure." As opposed to somebody coming up and be like, "Can I get one of those?" It reads differently.
I don't know you. What are you doing?
Let's see. I don't really understand this one. Individuals who have been touched are more likely to agree to participate in mall interviews. Oh, so like
if you contact, although that starts to breach some personal space issues.
Yeah. I always, consent is paramount for physical touch.
I've been sued for harassment of people in a mall, but I got them to come to my booth.
It was just for my scientific study.
That doesn't seem good.
Yeah, please don't do that. And so basically, what I'm saying is that particularly what I want to focus on is the point that they made about elderly nursing home residents and also just generally the health benefits of physical touch. And so these concepts generally are just about making people feel heard and valued.
Sure.
And that's important to apply to all walks of life. Mm-hmm. It's not just with my partner am I, communicating love and affection to them in the way that they can best receive it. It's about, just everybody as being human beings wanting to feel connected, and there are different ways for different people of experiencing that. And so
tell your friends you love them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a huge point. And using the 5 love languages as a guide for that for a lot of people works pretty well, which is why it's taken hold in popular culture. But understand that the more well supported by data underlying point is about social connection and humans as social creatures, and also the chemical impacts of being shown affection in one way or another. Mm-hmm. That releases feel good chemicals in our brain that we need for healthy living. And so even if the 5 love languages may not apply super well to your own relationship or to other aspects of your life, the underlying concept of wanting to connect with people in a positive way is sort of the guiding idea for all of this research and all of this experiential hypotheses that have been put out about how people show affection to one another. So with that, we'll wrap it up.
Yep.
And we wish you a happy Valentine's Day. For us, it is a couple days after Christmas. But we think ahead. We really do. So.
As always, thank you guys so much for participating in this and just for checking out the content. If you have anything that you would like for us to talk about, please let us know. We are always trying to come up with and looking for new ideas that we are interested in and that other people would be interested in. So please do not hesitate to share those with us. And as always, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a great rest of your day.
See you later, guys. Thank you.